Who wants to hear about classic video games? All right, well, we have an exciting panel scheduled here, so let's get right to it. First of all, who's been next door to our arcade? Everybody likes it. Well, my name is Mike Stulir. I'm with the American Classic Arcade Museum. I'm one of our board of directors. I'd like to welcome all of you for being here today. The room we have next door is just a very, very small sampling of our collection. We have over 350 classic arcade games available on display at our museum in Forest Beach, New Hampshire, located inside the Funspot Family Entertainment Center. Glad everybody enjoyed it. We certainly want to welcome you to come up to our facility at some point and sample all that we have to offer up there. Have a couple of people I'd like to extend some thanks to. First of all, hiding in the back corner back there is our president, Gary Vincent. Gary is the heart and soul of our organization. Gary's the heart and soul of our organization, and without him, we would not be able to do what we do. I'd also like to thank Bob Lawton and the Lawton family at Funspot for generously giving us all that they do in order for us to be able to function. I'd like to thank Kahil White and Ryan Hartman and Liz Montgliano here at PAX-East for their vision in allowing us to be here this weekend and every year at PAX-East. And I'd like to send special thanks out to all of our volunteers and everyone who has helped us in getting our room ready and making sure all these games are functional for you. So thank you to all of our volunteers. Subject of the panel today is going to be talking about classic game development, the ins and outs of what goes through the development, and I'm going to throw a curveball to our panelists this year. We're going to be talking about failure. We're going to talk about all the things that never really came to fruition, some of the things that maybe they had in mind and were trying to get out in the public, maybe things didn't test well, and we're going to talk about some things that maybe you guys never had seen or heard about before. So let me start by introducing our panelists. First of all, on my far right over here, former employee of Midway, who's responsible for such games as actually the whole Cruis'n series, Cruis'n USA, Cruis'n Exotica, Mr. Eric Prybil. And the rest of the panelists are all former employees of General Computer Corporation. A lot of these guys have been here before, some of this is their first time. General Computer Corporation, or GCC, was responsible for some arcade game development for Midway and for Atari, games such as Ms. Pac-Man, Junior Pac-Man, Quantum, and Food Fight, and then also a lot of home console game development and the development of the Atari 7800 hardware. Next to Eric is Steve Golson. Next to Steve is Kevin Osborn. And over here on my left, we have Jonathan Hurd. Next to Jonathan is Carlos Smith. And finally, we have Tom Flaherty. Okay, so why don't I go ahead and start with the GCC guys first. You guys have had a tremendous amount of success back in the day in terms of all of your development. Of course, games like Ms. Pac-Man, Junior Pac-Man, Quantum, and Food Fight were all big hits for their respective manufacturers. Responsible for the Atari 7800 development. A lot of home console games during that period. I wonder if you could spend some time talking about some of the things you were working on that never really made it to market, and why some of those things never made it to market, whether it be testing bad with consumers, or just not being able to make use of technology of the era, or so on and so forth.
Yeah, I'll jump in. So, I love talking about failure. Failure's your friend. So I can think of a couple things. We had an arcade game that, because Roland's not here, we can talk about it. It's called Rock Slide, and as I recall, it was pretty much done, but it did not test very well. It was a sort of a maze-like game that basically, imagine you're looking at a mountainside, and you're trying to climb up the mountain. Am I getting it right? You try to climb up a mountain, and there's bad guys at the top that are throwing rocks at you, and hence the name Rock Slide. And for some reason, it just didn't test well, and I know that that one was one that didn't come out. But Crystal Castles? Well, then there was a whole bunch that were halfway done when the whole market imploded in 1984, and the company went away. I mean, there was this one, we had Road Warrior, remember that one? And Crystal Castle, and Laser Rail, which was going to be just a fantastic game, a Laserdisc game. And we were talking to all kinds of folks doing computer animation, which was incredibly cutting edge back then to do that. So it's a shame that one never made it. But I mean, the other part about failure is that you would try things in a game and it didn't quite work well. Like in Ms. Pac-Man, we had different character designs, and one of the character designs, she had hair all the way down, and she would turn away from you, and she walked around the maze. But when she turned away from you, all you saw was the red hair, and it looked like the red monster. So it's really, so there were lots of things like that. And so maybe you guys can mention something that you tried that didn't work. Jonathan.
Oh yeah, I've got a great one.
Yeah, so, Jonathan's good with failure.
I mean, well practiced in failure, yes. In Food Fight, at one point we thought, wow, wouldn't it be cool to have, instead of a regular boring joystick, a banana joystick? And so I went to the store, and you know those like fake fruit that you can buy as a decoration? You've seen those, right? Any of you have those, by the way, in your house? Didn't think anyone did. But anyway, so I got a banana, cut off the end of it, and filled it with epoxy, and then took a joystick and inverted it into the epoxy-filled banana, and it was great. It was a joystick banana, and we put it out on test in the arcade. The problem was the epoxy-filled joystick was so heavy that the moment somebody gave it a good hard, tug, it just destroyed the bottom of the joystick mechanism. So no banana joystick, but I think that would have been a nice feature if it had been properly designed. So. Other failures? Come on, confident.
Well, I'm a console guy, and when we were doing 2600 games, those were all done under contract, so we really didn't have any option of failing completely, but we did often make a lot of trade-offs, I think. A lot of times you would actually, it's very complicated, but all the gameplay is done in the vertical blanking interval, and so if you took too much time to do anything, your screen would roll. and
you actually might want to mention what that actually is. That was a big thing. So I was from the generation that came after these gentlemen to my left here.
Older gentlemen.
Yes, the older generation. I started the industry, I was a kid, and the youngest one, and I still apparently am, I guess. At least in this room. Vertical blanking still was like, again, that's where everything happens. So this is the part where, I know you guys don't believe this, but we actually used to use CRT displays. The old television sets was effectively the technology we used, which basically scans from the top to the bottom of the screen and then goes back over again. But as that gun is moving back up, that's the processing time that you have to actually figure out what am I going to do on the screen next.
Because nothing's being displayed.
Because nothing was being displayed, but you're just basically, the gun's going back to the top.
And your processor is actually very busy. On the Atari 2600, you actually had one line of video that would be output by the chip, and you could set different registers to move one line of a sprite, a certain number of pixels, so every line you were counting cycles and then going to the next one. Of course, if you messed that up, I mean, you got some really pretty displays, which were good if you were doing certain things, but. Yeah. So the timing was very critical, and then the other thing is very limited resources. The Atari 2600 had 12 address lines, so you had 4K of address space, and there's no read-write line, and there was 128 bytes of RAM in the base station. Bytes. Not kilobytes, not megabytes,
it's
not
like
gigabytes.
a text message, basically.
Yeah, basically a text message. Yeah. Twitter, a tweet. You can put a tweet. They put a tweet in the RAM of the Atari 2600. And so you had to pack everything in. And sometimes you'd use individual bits if you didn't need to use a whole byte, things like that. We also used to pass our code around, and because in the emulator you could actually use more memory, so you'd get it working. But then when you tried to burn it into a cartridge, you ran out of room, and that was another common failure. And so to overcome that, what you had to do was you pass it around to your friends, and your friends would say, I can save you 5 bytes here. You're really sloppy writing that way. Or oh look, this data table here, this looks like this code over here. So why don't you just jump into your data table? And so we did a lot of things like that.
Yeah, well, along the lines of failure, we had a QA process. My brother actually was one of the QA engineers who worked for the company. And we had this policy, I forget exactly how long it was, but we had to go X amount of hours, let's say 40 hours, of testing on a cartridge without a bug before we release it. But the problem is, if they found about 20 hours in, they had to restart the testing all over again. So it was always this competition, and I'll never forget that all 3 of them that I remember just loved finding a bug. And they would just come to us like little kids on their birthday, oh, I found a bug, this is great. And of course, we'd hate that. So that whole arrangement really rose the quality of the product quite high. Partly because it was a cartridge. Once the cartridge was out there's no updates. That's it. It's out there. We're done. So it was quite a high level of quality that we had to meet. And of course, a bug could be something like what Kevin mentioned, the vertical blanking interrupt. Every once in a while, if you got a flash or something, that was a bug. That was it. You're done. You could go back and start again, find it, resubmit it, and hope that you didn't see their faces for another 40 hours. So that was kind of an interesting, different side of failure. It made it fun and challenging at the same time.
Did we start videotaping them while they were testing so that we could make it easier to reproduce exactly what the heck they were doing when it happened? They come back to me, I got about, what were you doing? Wow,
Yeah, I remember seeing the tester guys, when they'd be leaning back in their chair with their feet up on their desk, just playing the game with the video camera running, recording what they were doing, so if they found something stupid, they could go and show it to the programmer.
We toss a question out to the console guys. There's a story out there about former Atari programmer Howard Scott Warshaw, and he was given the task of putting Star Castle on the Atari 2600, and he couldn't make it work. So he ended up creating something kind of like Star Castle called Yar's Revenge, which went on to become one of the largest selling games on that platform. Since so much of your stuff that you were working on was licensed, did you ever have any freedom to be able to say, yeah, this isn't going to work, we want to try to do something else instead?
I can speak to that on in fact, my boss down there at the time, we had a discussion about this. In Robotron, one of the key things in the game was that when you shot something, you recorded Robotron movement, right? For the 7800.
Well, it's much more coordinated using it.
This is a sensitive topic up here, so. In Robotron, I did record a Robotron for the 7800, and one of the things if you played the original Robotron, the arcade game, is when you hit a lot of the enemies, they splat, we call it splats. Remember, Mike, splat? The explosion would go up and down the entire screen, and go the whole width of the screen. And we were already pushing it to try to get just enough of the actual enemies on the screen, because I think the Robotron had like 99 grunts on some of the screens. And we just couldn't meet that. And then it was like, well, we can't do that and do these explosions, because each little piece of that explosion, one guy exploding, is another 20 pieces. That's another 20 players, essentially. And we couldn't get it to fit, so we did a different animation. And we're like, well, why are you doing this? Why can't we get this? So we went back and forth and trying to figure out how we could possibly get the explosions that we wanted, but not have actual enemy characters disappear while the explosion went by and stuff. And ultimately, we had to compromise and use the simple animation, because there was a trade-off between getting action in the actual enemies and enough action on the screen versus simply having these elaborate explosions.
Actually, as long as Carlos mentions his boss, I suppose this would probably be a good time to introduce some special guests from our audience. We have a couple other people from GCC. You can just raise your hand. Mike Horowitz. Yes. Well, now that we've talked a little bit about failure, I'd like to move on and talk about something else. And one of the things we're really proud about that we're doing at the Arcade Museum right now is we're starting to work with more and more college groups. We have one institution in particular that is routinely sending students to study the games we have in the Arcade Museum, and they've been actually able to eliminate a textbook out of their curriculum based on the material we're able to present to them as part of their game studies. And I was recently posed a question from one of those students about what they might be able to do with what they learn if they aren't able to make it in gaming. Now, all of you are not involved in gaming anymore, and I was wondering how you guys were able to take your experiences in game development and translate them into the careers you're in now.
Oh, I have one thing to tell you. And actually, Eric and I were just talking about it, so he can follow up on it. One of the things you learn if you design a good game is that it's all about the user interface. The UI has to be just dead simple and obvious and easy. Particularly in an arcade game, you want somebody to be able to walk up and be able to just play it and make it work. And you can take that simplicity and UI background to all sorts of other products, any other type of consumer product. And you could talk about the product. You cannot talk about the product you're working on, but
I cannot.
talk about the
No.
UI.
But I can't say that the pattern just shows up over and over again. So when you think about the iPhone applications and the Android applications now, everyone, the goal is always that you start up the application and immediately there's no training, there's nothing, you're just able to use it. The arcade, again, back in the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, we had a moment to get people to play, and at the end of 2 minutes, if they walk away, that means we failed somehow. We can't have this gigantic learning curve over and over again, where people have to figure out, oh, I'll go to the website or something like that didn't exist 20, 30 years ago. So we had to hook them immediately, and it had to be completely obvious how it is that you're operating this. The fun thing is always, it would be totally awesome to fly a helicopter just like I did in Apache, and that's totally cool. Well, the reality of flying a helicopter is you've got 124 classroom hours before they're even going to let you sit in the cockpit somewhere. But in an arcade, you got 50 cents, you put it in, you're immediately flying. And being able to translate that actually into product nowadays, stuff where people actually have to use this, is an incredible skill. So that's one of the places, certainly.
One of the things that I learned, we didn't have the source code for the original arcade games that we did the conversions for the consoles. And so what we had to do is we had to play the games until we really understood them. And it really taught me how to sort of understand how a program works. Because you would say, oh, the monkeys throw the apples when you step beyond this pixel level. And so understanding sort of how decisions are made in a game to trigger different actions and things like that was a very useful design pattern for all kinds of different programs. Also learned a lot about debugging because there are a lot of bugs. And although my first job after GCC, it was a bit of a hard landing because we had much better tools, actually, for developing the embedded system games. We had very expensive in-circuit emulators that had hardware debuggers and things like that. And then I, when it was developing on Unix back in the early days, and the debugging tools weren't so good. But you learn a lot about how to narrow a problem down.
Yeah, I agree on the narrowing a problem down or debugging, and that's a skill that you can use in almost any kind of problem solving, whether you're an engineer or responsible for part of a company, where why are customers canceling their subscriptions, and then you start analyzing the reasons and then saying, well, why are we treating customers that way, and debugging your customer service operations. So any kind of debugging and analysis that we did in games, I think we've probably all used in other parts of our lives as well. So that's a really important skill.
I could just say that just general software engineering, knowing how to optimize code. When we were doing the video games, every cycle, every single cycle, every byte, everything counted. And there's less of that these days where it matters, but there certainly are still niches like embedded, and even using machine language still. Knowing how to optimize code, knowing how to make it fast, it still matters in certain products in certain industries. And that whether you're doing a game or whether you're doing DSP or whatever, yeah, it all it still carries over directly.
I think the equivalent today, though, we did a lot of assembly language, which made me unafraid to do anything because it was hard. And once you could do that, then if you had to dip down or write an interrupt handler or something like that. But these days, I think the opportunity to really learn skills that are transferable to other scientific computing and things like that is with the GPUs. The idea of breaking up parallel tasks and using those GPU APIs. So I think that those opportunities to learn those low-level skills that would give you a great advantage over the unwashed masses of computer science graduates.
Can't debug.
They can't what?
Can't debug. I think kids come out of school, they have no idea how to debug anything.
I just wanted to echo what Kevin and Carlos said about really getting down to the low level. One of the things that you also do is you have to learn to get creative, and one of the ways you can get creative is to see the same resources in a bit of a different light, use something in a different way. Just because this register was meant to do this, or you can use it to do something else. And that really teaches you to have a flexible viewpoint when you're approaching some engineering problems, which leads to getting things done that other people might not be able to figure out if you look at a different point of view. And I've used my engineering skills I learned there, especially assembly language programming, making sure that everything, the timing is right. You have to design your software correctly. If you just design a mess and it just happens to work, if you make a change later on and all of a sudden it stops working, it can either be a short, easy path to figure out why it's not working if you've written your code in a disciplined manner, or it can be a horrible mess trying to figure out why it's not working. And years later, I did work for a very high-end audio DSP, which is the same type of deal, only if it doesn't work there, you actually blow out people's $3,000, $10,000 speakers, and you hurt people's ears, and you have to be extremely disciplined. So it was very similar to writing video games in that regard. You just had to do it right and know it was right. And when you figured it out, it was a great reward to me.
All right, well, I'd like to move on and talk about a different topic. One thing we've been running into at ACAM is we get contacted on a pretty regular basis by people doing software development and people in the video game industry regarding source code from back in the day. It seems to be a real problem that a lot of the video game houses from back in the 70s and 80s did not retain any of their code. Most recently, I can't go into the specifics unfortunately, but most recently Gary and I were contacted by a developer in Japan looking for source code for an arcade game that came out in 1988 because they wanted to do a new fresh update for it for modern consoles and wanted to see the original code. And it's really disturbing for us that so many major companies don't retain any of that stuff. Now, Steve, I know from our conversations over the years, you guys have been meticulous about a lot of the stuff that you've retained. And I'm wondering if there was any thought back in the day as to whether or not the need to retain this stuff for uses in the future.
No.
Okay, moving on.
In one decade later, no.
No, see, basically the only reason that happens is when you have like people like me who are just invertebrate pack rats, and they just happen to save things that 30 years later, oh, you mean
it's supposed to happen.
Yeah, exactly. There's that too. But so much of it is that you get done with a project and you're done with it, and it's like I'm done and I'm moving on to something else, and you rarely think about archiving it or carefully putting it away that you might go back and want to use it again. You're lucky to have whatever we have.
Source code still, if you have something over in the 8-inch floppy disk.
Would have changed that if there was all kinds of legal liability that they had to cover themselves?
Yes.
So that would have, I think that's the game changer now, which is why everything is now saved, which is every piece of everything. Somebody's going to scrutinize it sooner or later and hang a lawsuit.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
I'm also a pack rat, and I saved Food Fight printout of Food Fight source code, and I actually looked through it for that article to figure out the initials of people who are in the high score table, so that I could, remember all the people that worked on the game. So, no, I still have files of old stuff.
The article that Jonathan just mentioned, we started something new at ACAM. We're doing a new thing on our website called Game of the Month. And what we're doing is we'll reach out to a former developer like Jonathan or other people, and we'll pick their brain on what went on to create that game, and we'll write a historical document to put out there for people to be able to find out the ins and outs of what the programmer went through putting that game together. Jonathan went back through all of his notes. He actually found right down to the penny how much was spent on the development hardware that you guys were using.
Scary. So just one more thing about why we do not have any of this. I mean, I have the original Ms. Pac-Man source code. It's on an 8-inch floppy. Who has an 8-inch floppy drive? Yeah, okay. So, you know, and I was actually, this past year, was actually able to find somebody who had the original Tektronix development system that he had bought on eBay and gotten working again, and was able to read the floppy disk and get all the files off of it for me, you know, 30 years later. So that's a big problem as well. If you print it out, you can always read it when you print it out. So
that's very true. Yeah. I'd like to move on, and we've got about 25 minutes left. And one thing we failed in miserably last year was we really didn't get a lot of time for audience Q&A. So we do have a microphone set up, which we will put right over here in the middle of the room. If anybody would like to ask a question of our panelists, why don't you go ahead and start forming a line here in the middle, and we'll make sure we leave some time for that.
Hi.
Okay, go ahead. Can you tell us your name?
My name is Boris Francis. Thank you for your time. Recently, MoMA has accepted video games as art, and setting up venues for people to come in and see it. How does this make you feel? How will you interact with, hopefully, a revival of interest in these machines?
wow, makes me feel old. You know. It's thrilling, and there was the thing at the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian did video game history and places like ACAM. But it's like, wow, I guess that was really fun. And I'm glad people are still enjoying it. You've got your Defender shirt on, right? I mean, it's cool. These games. I guess the one thing I would say is really good games are timeless. They are fun to play, even 30 years later. And I think that's a real mark of a good game, that it has longevity and that you can still enjoy it. You can still go in the arcade and enjoy it. So it's like good. I'm glad we accomplished something. Fun is good.
The other aspect of that is that not having the artists up here, but what they had to work with would drive anybody else normally to absolutely crazy. The amount of time that they devoted to getting something to look good, given our limitations, they really need to be applauded for that, as well as the people who worked on the music. It was an art aside from what we did that brought it all together.
Because they didn't have workstations, they didn't have, they had to work on graph paper, and they had to imagine what it would look like on the screen. They'd have to wait a few days for us to get it up there on the screen for them to see what it looked like. Yeah.
Oh, I thought of another failure. So the 7800, the initial idea for the 7800, it was going to have really cool sound synthesis to go along with the really cool video. And unfortunately, we did not have enough room on our chip or time to develop it. And so very early on, we threw out the sound. And so that's why all the 7800 games have the same terrible 2600 sound, except for the few that have a sound chip built in. We at least figured out how to put a sound chip on the cartridge, so things like Ball Blazer. But that was a real, looking back on it, it's like, I wish we had been able to get the sound working, because that's a real limitation of those games.
If I can just touch real quick on what you said, just to wrap up. We've recognized at ACAM for a long time that these games are a very important part of our history. To be able to get that distinction of art in terms of the creative process and the games itself, I think that's fantastic. I'm not sure I necessarily believe in them in terms of being art, but that type of definition definitely opens this stuff up a lot more to the public. It gets more exposure, and for us, that's a fantastic thing. So, you know, for us to hear that that's something that's out there now, that people are thinking in that way, that's terrific. I think that's fantastic. So, thank you very much for your question. I know this guy. What's your name?
I'm John. How you doing, Mike?
John.
It's good to see you.
Good to see you.
My question is Kevin mentioned that in doing the console versions of the arcade games, you didn't have access to source code, that you'd have to actually play them to learn about them.
That was tough.
Yeah, but my question is, how were the licensors gracious enough to send you an arcade board, or did you have to actually go to a local arcade and actually hunt down the games themselves to play them? I mean, how did you?
We typically either bought one or the company would send us one. I think. I don't know. Yeah. We had a whole arcade, and I have to admit that, you know, we also played games we weren't working on. I got really good at Robotron. Yes. I was helping Carlos out.
And would they just not want to send you source code for copyright reasons, that kind of thing? Just trend.
So it's funny, I was mentioning, so the Robotron, I only just learned that you guys did the conversion to Robotron today. So the version of Robotron, so the guys who did that are the same, a couple of the guys were the ones who worked with me on Cruis'n. The version that shipped of Robotron, so we would actually continue developing the game would be in RAM, so it was being a non-fileable version of memory. And they would patch it in real time, so they basically would type in new hex codes while they were playing the game to just continue, you know, making the game. Well, after one really, really long night of doing this, they had completely lost track. Usually they'd write stuff down on a printout so that they know how to patch it back. The version of Robotron that shipped was actually a version that they dumped it out of RAM and said, we're done, good enough. So there isn't actually a written version anywhere of the version that shipped of Robotron.
And I think that, you know, just the concept of source control was very new. There were a lot of companies. And so
a lot of them were Japanese, and so it was like, you're going to call Japan and ask them for source code? No.
And the other thing is, I think that sometimes we felt that it wouldn't be that useful because it was a completely different hardware set, and so, you know, and they were often written in assembly, and so it was in some ways better to try to recreate the feel, since you couldn't do the game exactly, since the 2600 in particular was very primitive.
So it just actually got a tinge of the rift between the arcade and the home console versions. Wouldn't be useful, yeah, right.
I have a little version of a story that this brought up. Well, I did the conversion of Xevious to the 7800. Xevious is a vertically scrolling game with a very large map. Not only did the map have visible objects, but it had invisible objects as well, and you had to bomb them and find them. So I expected that I was going to get this map ahead of time, but we never got the map ahead of time. So I used to come home from work every day complaining to my new wife that my aunt heard from playing Xevious all day, and she just didn't understand. So what I was always concerned with when we shipped the game, that we actually found all these hidden things, because they were worth a lot of points, et cetera, et cetera. And when the game was done and it was shipped, we finally did get the map from them, and we had found everything on the map, but it really would have been a lot easier if we had the map.
All right, by the way, before we move on, that was John Anderson, and we're doing a panel tomorrow with John and a few other people on the actual preservation of these things. We're going to be talking about saving them from dumpsters and everything else we find them, and you know how we save things and make sure that they're here for future generations. So if anybody's interested in that panel, that'll be tomorrow at 1 o'clock in the Sphinx Theater. So I'll see you tomorrow. Next question, we have Nate, please.
Hi, my name is John.
What's your question, John?
Recently, in the last couple of years, I've noticed some niche development communities building tools to build games for older consoles, and including a professor who built, I think it was a basic kit for NES development. And some developers have taken this so far as to even build cartridges that are playable on the original systems, the Atari 2600, the SNES, particularly the Genesis, etc. I was wondering what your guys' feelings are about these new games for the old consoles coming out, and if you think this is a good trend, or if you don't really care, or if you think that maybe we should be moving on to newer tools.
I think it's great. I think that, I mean, you can't say it's an economically good idea for anyone. I don't think that you do it for money. You know, you do it for love, and also, you know, you learn a lot trying to do these things. It's a real challenge, and it's a great puzzle. And you know, I think that if that carries forward into the future as a way to really understand the basics of computing and things like that, I think it's a fabulous hobby. I don't think it will ever become a big industry though. Thanks.
No, my name is not John. Hi, my name is Brian. What's up, guys? Thank you so much for coming out today. I just think this is a really interesting opportunity for me, because one thing I've always sort of wondered about is how these old arcade and 2600 games were actually developed, you know, when they were developed. And I heard you guys talking about Unix systems and sort of software emulators for the Atari 2600 and like workstations, and I'm just wondering if you could elaborate a little more on what exactly you would use and what languages you would use to actually write the games. It just sounds interesting.
So we had, it went through several company names, Genrad, Contron, the emulation stations. They were in-circuit emulators that plugged into the microprocessor socket on the actual game unit. And they emulated 6502 in the case of the Ataris. We had dedicated emulators for the arcade. Similar.
That's the name of the chip, the 6502 in the Atari?
The Atari 2600 was a 6507, which was a neutered 6502. And a lot of the arcade games had Z80s, and so we had emulators for those too. They had CRT and a keyboard, and they ran CPM, actually. And then some of the, and all of the Atari 2600 and 7800 development was done in assembly. But some of the arcade games were done in C.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, Food Fight was mostly written in C on a Tektronix 8560 Unix-based development system, and then we would load it into an 8540 emulation station that plugged into the 68000 on the hardware. And the C compiler was buggy though, and so a lot of you have to check the code very carefully, and also if you wanted to make it run fast, you'd have to write it in assembly language. So a lot of Food Fight was written in 68000 assembly language.
It's a dream of having a assembly.
I know, we're wimps. We got to use high-level language, but
we actually contributed some of the early cross-compiler stuff back. I think was Chris did some of that, right? The GCCs. Did he? I think so. Yeah. So it was fun.
Hi gentlemen, my name is Marcus. My question centers around the sophistication and the complexity of games today. And I believe Eric touched upon earlier about the challenge of creating an arcade game where as soon as you put the 50 cents in, you immediately know how to play it, you immediately know what it's about. There's not a lot of thinking behind how to get used to the control system. A lot of my colleagues I talk to play a lot of games, such as myself. I grew up with Atari. We keep going back to those games, the Ataris, the Nintendos, because of how simple it was to pick up the remote and start playing right away without having to read a manual. Now they have games today where they're so complex and they're so sophisticated, there's about 50 buttons to do one simple move, as opposed to pressing A or B or moving the joystick. So I just wanted your thoughts on, with the technology we have today, do you think that the gaming industry is moving towards an area where games are getting really complex to understand in terms of a mechanical control system, as opposed to the earlier versions of Atari and Nintendo and the like, where people like me like simplicity. I like to pick up a game and start playing it from day one without any problems. So that really interested me when that was touched upon earlier. I just wanted your thoughts on that.
Can I try this one?
Yeah, please.
So again, these guys got to do games that really, they just broke the mold. Nothing like that stuff ever existed before. By the time it got to the late 80s and the 90s, all of a sudden the industry started changing, and all of a sudden the risk of failure was getting expensive. We couldn't just have cartloads of cartridges and then dump them into a dumpster because they couldn't sell it. We couldn't have a whole bunch of arcade games produced. So the industry started taking stuff down tighter and tighter and tighter. So it became the punch kick game, the driving game. you know, the space game, there wasn't a whole lot of variations by the time you hit the late 90s, that there was really the same genres over and over again. So if you look on the floor, and don't get me wrong, I love those games that are out there. These things are gorgeous and beautiful. The depth is just amazing. I'm blown away every time I see these things. They can't fail. You put a couple $1 million into a game development, it's not like you're going to go 18 months and go, yeah, we're pulling the plug because this ain't going to work. There's just too much at risk. So when you talk about failure mitigation, you know, we had roughly 2 to 4 weeks to figure out and say we could demonstrate at least enough of the gameplay to say that I think this is going to work and I want more money and I want the ability to continue developing. You know, by the time that I got there, again, 89, the development cycle was probably 1 to 2 years. You know, Cruis'n took me almost 4 or 5 years at that point, and we had to do everything. When you look at the stuff that's out there now, they have a lot of people. We had 2 programmers, you know, 2 hardware designers, and a couple of artists. That was it. You guys had even less resources at your disposal there.
Yeah, I mean, our entire company went from nothing to 300 people to nothing in 4 years. So, I'm over speaking a little bit there. But yeah, and I look at I mentioned this to Eric earlier, I look at the analogy of movies. You know, the very first movies were done by engineers. You know, Thomas Edison, one engineer, one guy, made a movie. And you look at movies today, and it took them a short amount of time, and it was relatively cheap. And you look at today, it's like movies take years, and there's thousands of people in the credits, and it costs $100 million. And the same thing has happened with video games. And now it's these huge teams spending lots of money and lots of time, and boy, they better get it right, or you're 38 studios. But honestly, they tried to do something really amazing, and they weren't able to pull it off. And it's, you know, the price of failure has gotten really, really high. The only thing analogous now, I think, is games for you know, one person can hack together a really cool game, and maybe you'll make money, maybe you won't for your phone.
If you look at Angry Birds, there's not real much of a UI on that at all, and I think that harkens back to a day where it's the gameplay. But you know, the industry has matured, and when most things mature, they split off into different sections. You can have games with a huge learning curve that are going to attract one type of people, and an Angry Birds is going to attract a different type of person. But I think the unifying factor was always the user interface. Whether you're playing Skyrim or whether you're playing Angry Birds, the user interface is very important. It's just that with Skyrim or these other games, the user interface is even more important because you're trying to get something complex done in an easy fashion. And user interface is something that oftentimes I've seen companies just wait till the last minute to do. And it shows. So if you're going to do something complex, you really have to spend proportionally more of your time working on that user interface to make it succeed, because it can be the most beautiful game in the world. But if you can't play it 15 minutes and sit, people are just going to walk away from it.
But it's also a matter of the maturity of the industry. I mean, Civilization 5 is one of my favorite games, but it's immensely complex. But on the other hand, the other night I was playing a game by a little indie developer called Ultratron, which is a beautiful little dual-stick shooter playing with my Xbox controller on my PC. I think that's a 1 or 2 person company or something. They're all still out there, and it's awesome that there's people still doing that kind of simple gameplay. But the industry is mature enough that there's the games that you can play that you spend, you know, hours and hours and hours getting into something. I think it's fantastic that there's room for both of them still. So support your indie developers too.
Let me wrap up your question by asking a question to the audience. Let me see a show of hands. Who's played Steel Battalion? Who likes Steel Battalion? Now, I showed Steel Battalion to Gary Vincent yesterday for the first time. We had gone over to see our friends Joe and Sherman over in the console room. Gary had never seen Steel Battalion before, so I took him in that room with the Steel Battalion set up. And for those who don't know, Steel Battalion is the most complex game I think has ever been created in terms of its control scheme. You know, between the buttons and the foot paddles and the joysticks and the throttle and everything else that's involved in that game. To me, I look at that game is not fun, that game is work. And, you know, I'm very deeply involved in what we do at ACAM, but for me it's an escape. I have a career, I have a life, I have things going on, and to come home and invest that amount of time in learning in that game seems like another job.
We used to have a saying, so back in the late 80s, it was a game would be a success at the arcade if you could hold a beer in one hand and play it with the other.
My definition of fun is when the instructions are avoid missing ball for high score.
That's right.
But you look at that game as a technological achievement, it's brilliant. But nobody's tried doing anything like that again. And why is that? It's because nobody can grasp it. And I think that falls into your question, because a lot of times people want to do these things, it's an escape, it's not their life. They want to be able to pick up, and they want to be able to play, they want to have fun. And I see that as a problem moving forward. I think a lot of things are getting more and more complicated, they're becoming less fun.
Yeah, but
anybody agree with me on that?
Yeah. But I gotta say, that's true of all games, not just video games. I mean, who plays Go Fish? Who plays Magic the Gathering? You know? Right? There's a learning curve that can be too steep.
Next question.
Hi, my name is Joe, and I was wondering, you mentioned Howard Scott Warshaw, and I saw him speak at a different convention about a year ago, and he'd mentioned that he stopped making games because when he was making games, he felt like it was an authorship, and I know you guys just kind of touched on that and answered the previous question, but he felt like games were an authorship because he was the one who did everything, basically, when he was making 2600 games, and now it's more collaborative. But now with like Steam games and iOS and all that, there are opportunities for authorship. Are there similar reasons why all of you got out of the industry? Now that there's authorship, chances of you get back into the industry, making something on the side for iOS or anything like that?
I think we got out of it because the industry crashed. Is the main reason. But there was not, very few of the games even that we did were kind of like one person. Like, I worked on Food Fight, but there was a whole team of people doing different things, the music, the graphics, worked with a couple of other programmers as well. But it was really fun to create something from scratch and to spend more of the time thinking about what the game would be and the gameplay rather than spending a lot of time coordinating, some complex organization to create something. So I think that made it a lot of fun, and Eric can probably talk about the other
after the fall. So
yeah.
But even at that point, a game developer would last about 2 years and be burnt out at that point. So I lasted 12. And I was an old man. I was all of 30, 31 at that point. So I had to move on. They gave me the rocking chair and sent me away.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I mean, I went back into the game industry briefly after, and it was still the stage where you could contribute. I mean, on the games I worked on scripting language, I worked on level design. We all got to do everything, but the hours are brutal, the pay was terrible, and after a while, it's just kind of stops being fun. The creativity part, yeah, I would do it again if I got to do something by myself.
All right, next question.
My name is Nelson. I have a question for Eric. So, Cruis'n USA, my favorite arcade game. And I didn't really understand it when I was a kid, but when you beat the game, you know what's going. You get a message congratulating you from Bill Clinton in the hot tub.
Okay, so you can't go backwards. You got to go back to 1994. So Bill Clinton and the Jennifer Flowers whole incident was happening, and so we were just having a whole lot of fun. We didn't know how to end the game. So if you ever see the game, you drive through this tunnel in DC, and it's coated with $100 bills with Hillary Clinton smoking a cigar. And you have to look to see this thing, but again, you have to play through the whole game to get there. Then when we get to the end, we take and we airlift your car and we bring it on top of the White House. And on top of the White House, there's Bill Clinton, Jennifer Flowers, and Hillary Clinton in a hot tub. And we have cows and we've got a barn out in back. It has this stupid dialogue that just runs with the whole thing. Yee-haw, welcome, Cruis'n USA. We repeated the theme actually in Cruis'n World, where we bring the car up onto a space shuttle, we launch it into space, you land on Mars, the rover opens up and there's another hot tub because Bill Clinton was still president at that point. I'm pretty sure there's a YouTube video of that. So you're probably too young to even know Bill Clinton was a president.
been an awesome answer to end on.
That's right.
Okay, we got about 5 minutes left, so let's get through the next couple.
Hey, my name's Nika. I'm hoping for the sake of redundancy, the answer isn't just user interface. But as people who made some of the earliest successful video games, and as people who play the video games now, as complex as they are, what do you think makes a good game? And I understand, you know, when Frogger's cutting edge graphics, we're not going to talk about the narrative quality of like the Frog. Yeah. So, you know, and if I ask a lot of people what makes a good game, a lot of them will instantly say, well, a good story. Well, you guys didn't have a story. You couldn't have a story. You didn't have the RAM for a story. So comparatively, what do you think makes a good game? Like, what makes it work?
Oh, so I've got one quick thing here on that. So Betty Ryan Tilko, who couldn't be here, when I first joined GCC, she was playing Tempest. I don't know if you remember Tempest, but a vector-based game. But she said, you know, it's something about a feeling of danger. That, you know, you feel you're in this dangerous position and then you get out of it. So somehow the game has to get you into this space where you feel like it's important and you're surviving or you're encountering danger. So I think that's one thing that's really important.
I wouldn't undercut the graphics. Frogger, when that came out, was absolutely cute. It really was adorable. The music, that was just, it really was a hook there. And it just was fun and easy and clean to play. With Cruis'n, we just went for the fact that you should be able to get in with a beer in one hand and still be able to have a whole lot of fun, even if you're playing with somebody who's just completely serious, and the next kid down is, you know, 4 years old, where the parents just set them in front of it and still have fun. And so there's a mechanics there still is the visual appeal, there's also is the audio. I think all that stuff has to gel together, and it has to sort of coherently fit into something that goes, you know what, I can dig this is cool, I dig this. So.
Hello, I'm Ken. I was wondering if I could get your opinions on whether touch gaming is a help or a hindrance to that kind of dive into easy-to-use user-fit interface that you've been talking about.
Which gaming?
Touch gaming, say on iDevices or any type of phone, etc., versus something like a banana or whatever you can just grab onto. In terms of physically interacting with the game in an easy fashion.
Yeah. Well, see, think way back to, you know, 2006, before there was an iPhone, right? And they had the cutting edge phones had keyboards. Okay, and if you handed somebody a phone, they would not have been doing this. So we've been taught that this is a way to interface with the device, and it doesn't take you long to realize, oh, look what I can do. It's a very intuitive thing. So I think it makes it very approachable to use something that we all have 10 of. Mostly.
It's an interesting thing. So as this creeps into the regular, so I do other products also. The touchscreen actually poses a whole bunch of challenges because what you do on your phone is it's a very personal experience versus what you do on other devices. I just got to be vague about that kind of stuff. But it's interesting that like we still haven't hit that point where this stuff is now intuitive and everyone knows it. If you're trying to make a product for, you know, everybody in this room, you guys will get a touchscreen out of the box. There's not any question. Now think of your parents or, you know, the older uncles you have. If you're trying to get something that's a product that they can use, all of a sudden there's a now generation shift that they don't get it, they don't understand it. So it's interesting what's going to happen. I don't think we're actually there at the answer yet. Is it going to get better or worse? Or I think it's going to get better, but I think it's also going to change a little bit.
And I think it's hard. I think that it hasn't been all completely figured out yet. I mean, I think that you know, the iPhone did a lot to standardize a lot of the gestures and interaction methods and things like that. But I've seen a lot of games and things like that where people are doing completely inappropriate things with their fingers, and that another control mechanism would be better. And so I think it does limit you sometimes to what kind of games you can actually do. And you're starting to see that. You're starting to see people develop controllers for your Android iPhone devices. It also blocks your view of part of the screen. So the best will be when the touch screen's on the back of the device and you're actually not, you're able to still see it, but you're using touch. I mean, and again, it depends on the game, how you would use that.
Okay, one final question.
Hi, my name is Andy. I was wondering, for those who have moved from doing arcade games to home consoles or vice versa, is there a philosophical shift when you have an arcade game, you're trying to get the most money out of the person, you know, as quickly as possible, so that if they play for half an hour on a quarter, you've failed, whereas on the home console, that's not an issue. Do you have to take that into account when you're designing, or did you?
Yeah, yes. And I think actually back to what we started with was failure. I think this was one thing that we kind of missed at General Computer, was we were so careful to exactly mimic the game as it was in the arcade. We kind of missed the point of it needed to be fun. And I think the best example is pole position. You play pole position in the arcade and you go 8 laps and it goes game over. You know, good game, game over, this is your time, and that's it. Well, guess what? Our home version of pole position did the same thing, because it was trying to be exactly like the arcade. But it's a very different playing experience at home, because you want to be able to play for a long period of time, right? It's not, you don't have the beer, well maybe, but you know, you're not putting a quarter in and you want them to play again and put another quarter in. And then the second thing is, so it's a longer game experience at home. And then the other thing is that you're willing to take the time to learn the game at home. If you do have, well, gee, which control do I use to do what? What's the manual say? You might do that at home, but you're certainly not going to do it in the arcade. So I think there are differences, and I think that might be one thing that we kind of missed. But jump in.
Well, our job was to duplicate the game as closely as possible from the arcade on what we had. So if the game was brutally hard in the arcade, then the home version was brutally hard, because otherwise it wouldn't be a faithful reproduction of the game. And that was, you know, our charter was to duplicate the experience at home as much as we could. So I hope Robotron for Cerner was really wicked hard.
We would, for our arcade games, we'd take them out to an arcade in Framingham called Fun and Games and actually watch people play and keep refining it. And I had all these stats on how long people spend in each rack to then go back and optimize that to try to make it both fun, but and feel like you've got a good value for your quarter, but also, you know, to get people to play as many games as possible. So it's definitely something that we looked at.
Okay, well, unfortunately our time is up, so let's have a round of applause. We're very fortunate at the American Classic Arcade Museum that we've been able to build some relationships with people like these gentlemen here and other developers, and they are fantastic to us in terms of the work that we're doing, and I want to thank each and every one of you for coming out today and sharing your wisdom and your experiences. And just like to remind everybody again, tomorrow we have a panel in the Sphinx Theater at 1 p.m. regarding game preservation. Our room next door is open tonight till midnight, and
free play.
Everything's on free play, and the Arcade Museum is a 501c3 nonprofit. We totally subsist on donations from people like yourselves to keep operating. If you like what we see, we'd really appreciate if you could swing by our donation box and help us out a little bit. Thank you all for coming.